The Silent Princess. The Grand Unity Ball was the most prestigious event in the known galaxy. Once every decade, rulers, diplomats, admirals, and scholars from hundreds of star systems gathered beneath the shimmering crystal dome of the Imperial Palace to celebrate peace among civilizations. Thousands of floating lights drifted through the vaulted hall, while an orchestra of alien instruments blended melodies no single species could have imagined alone. Every guest wore clothing that reflected their world's traditions, creating a dazzling sea of colors beneath the golden chandeliers. At the far end of the ballroom stood the magnificent imperial throne. Upon it sat Empress Seraphis, sovereign of the Astrian Empire. Across the galaxy, her name inspired equal measures of admiration and fear. She had united dozens of rival systems, ended centuries of war, and built the largest civilization ever known. Her commands could move fleets numbering in the millions. Yet on this evening, despite the applause and celebration surrounding her, her attention never wandered far from the small figure standing quietly beside the throne. Princess Lyra, her only daughter. Unlike the confident nobles laughing across the ballroom, Lyra remained perfectly still. Her pale emerald skin shimmered softly beneath the palace lights, and her silver eyes followed every couple dancing across the polished marble floor. She smiled whenever someone spun gracefully through the music, but the smile faded almost as quickly as it appeared. She wished she could join them. Years earlier, before her birth, an accident aboard the Imperial flagship had exposed the unborn princess to a rare form of cosmic radiation. Although the physicians had saved her life, the damage to her nervous system could never be completely repaired. Walking required immense concentration. Her balance failed without warning. Even standing for long periods exhausted her. The finest scientists from every civilized world had searched for a cure. None had succeeded. As the orchestra played another elegant waltz, several young nobles glanced toward Lyra before quietly looking away. None wished to embarrass the princess by inviting her to dance. Others simply assumed she could not. Their silence hurt far more than cruel words ever could. The Empress noticed every glance. She also noticed her daughter's quiet disappointment. For all her power, she could not give Lyra the one thing the child desired most: to feel like everyone else. Across the ballroom, Ethan Carter carried a silver serving tray through the crowd. To the guests, he was merely another member of the palace staff, a human waiter hired for the celebration. Few paid him any attention. Humans were still newcomers among the great civilizations, respected for their determination, but rarely trusted with important responsibilities. Ethan preferred it that way. It allowed him to observe people. As he refilled crystal glasses and accepted empty plates, he noticed something others seemed determined to ignore. While everyone celebrated unity, one lonely child stood completely alone. He had seen that expression before. His younger sister had been born with a condition that limited her mobility. Growing up, Ethan had watched classmates treat her differently, not with cruelty, but with uncomfortable pity. She had once confessed that being ignored hurt more than being laughed at. That memory had never left him. He glanced toward the orchestra, then back to the princess. Another dance had begun. Still no one approached her. Nearby servants whispered among themselves. Poor child. No one dares ask. The Empress has spent fortunes searching for treatments. Ethan lowered his eyes thoughtfully. Perhaps the problem wasn't that no one cared. Perhaps everyone cared so much they had forgotten how to simply treat her like a child. Without fully realizing he had made the decision, Ethan placed his serving tray onto a nearby table. Several servants stared in confusion. "Where are you going?" one whispered urgently. Ethan simply smiled. To ask someone a question, every step toward the throne felt heavier than the last. Palace guards noticed immediately, their hands moving toward the elegant energy weapons resting at their belts. Several ambassadors paused mid-conversation, watching the lone human approach the imperial family. The orchestra continued playing, unaware that the entire atmosphere inside the ballroom had suddenly changed. Ethan stopped several feet before the throne and bowed respectfully. Silence spread through the hall. The musicians gradually lowered their instruments. Hundreds of guests turned toward the unexpected scene. Even the Empress regarded him with calm curiosity. No servant had ever approached her during the Grand Unity Ball. Not once. Ethan lifted his eyes toward the young princess. Instead of seeing royalty, he simply saw a lonely little girl watching others enjoy an evening she desperately wanted to share. He offered a gentle smile. "Your Highness," he said softly, "would you honor me with a dance?" Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Several nobles looked horrified. One ambassador nearly dropped his glass. The palace guards tensed, awaiting the Empress's command. Princess Lyra blinked in disbelief, her silver eyes widening as though she wasn't sure she had heard correctly. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then the Empress looked from the human waiter to her daughter. She saw hope returning to Lyra's face for the first time that evening. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Empress nodded. The guard stepped back. Ethan walked forward, but instead of leading the princess immediately onto the dance floor, he knelt beside her, so they stood at eye level. In a voice only she could hear, he whispered with a reassuring smile, "We're not going to dance like everyone else." His hand remained patiently extended. "We're going to dance your way. Humanity's different kind of strength." The ballroom remained silent as Ethan knelt before Princess Lyra, his hand still patiently extended. Around them, hundreds of eyes watched the impossible unfold. Royal guards remained alert, uncertain whether to intervene, while nobles whispered behind jeweled masks. No one could remember a palace servant speaking so naturally to a member of the imperial family. Lyra stared at Ethan's hand. Her heart raced. For years, every invitation had been wrapped in sympathy. Doctors treated her like a patient. Tutors treated her like fragile crystal. Even children her own age hesitated to play with her, terrified she might fall. Ethan's expression held none of that. He simply looked as though he wanted to dance. Very slowly, Lyra placed her small hand in his. The orchestra hesitated until the Empress raised one graceful hand. The conductor understood immediately and signaled the musicians to begin again. This time, however, the lively waltz was replaced with a slow, gentle melody that drifted through the vast hall like a warm breeze. Ethan did not guide the princess toward the center of the dance floor. Instead, he stood beside her. "We'll take one step," he whispered, "and if that's enough, we'll stop." Lyra nodded nervously. Together, they took a single step. She wobbled. Instinctively, Ethan steadied her, not by lifting or carrying her, but by lightly supporting her elbow until she regained her balance. "You caught yourself," he said with a smile. "I barely helped." The princess blinked. Usually, people apologized whenever she stumbled. Ethan celebrated her recovery instead. She smiled. Another step followed, then another. Each movement matched the music rather than fighting against it. Ethan never hurried her or expected perfection. If she needed to pause, they paused. If she laughed after losing her balance, he laughed with her instead of pretending nothing had happened. The dance slowly became something entirely different. It was not about graceful turns or flawless technique. It was about trust. Around the ballroom, conversations faded into silence. Alien admirals lowered their glasses. Diplomats stopped discussing treaties. Even the palace servants forgot their duties as they watched the unlikely pair. One elderly ambassador quietly murmured, "He's dancing with her, not around her." The words spread softly through those nearby. For the first time in years, Princess Lyra was not being protected from life. She was participating in it. As the melody continued, Ethan gently clapped to the rhythm. "Your turn." Lyra hesitated before clapping once. The sound echoed through the quiet ballroom. Again, clap, step, smile. Soon they were creating their own simple dance, one perfectly suited to her abilities. Every movement she completed filled her with growing confidence. The fear of falling slowly began to disappear, because whenever she stumbled, Ethan simply adjusted the rhythm. "The dance follows you," he said. "You don't have to follow the dance." Those words struck something deep inside her. For years she had believed she needed to become like everyone else. Now someone had shown her another possibility. Perhaps the world could meet her halfway. Near the throne, Empress Seraphis watched with growing emotion. She remembered endless hospital rooms, special exercises, experimental treatments, scientists promising miracles that never came. She had devoted every resource of her empire to repairing her daughter's body. Yet no one had thought to heal her confidence. The realization settled heavily upon her heart. It had taken an ordinary human waiter to see what an empire had overlooked. The music gradually grew brighter. Ethan offered his hand once more. "Would you like to try a turn?" The princess giggled nervously. "I'll fall. Then I'll be right here." She took a deep breath. Slowly, carefully, she turned. For one terrifying moment, she lost her balance. Gasps swept across the ballroom. But instead of collapsing, Lyra corrected herself with 2 tiny steps. She remained standing. The entire hall froze. The princess looked down at her own feet in disbelief. "I did it," she whispered. Ethan grinned. "You absolutely did." Joy spread across her face like sunlight breaking through clouds. The shy child who had hidden beside the throne only minutes earlier disappeared, replaced by a little girl whose laughter echoed beneath the crystal dome. Without thinking, several guests began applauding. The applause spread from one corner of the ballroom to another until every noble, officer, servant, and ambassador was clapping together. Not because the princess had danced perfectly, because she had danced at all. Tears gathered in the Empress's eyes. For years she had believed strength meant protecting those she loved from every hardship. Tonight, a human had shown her a different kind of strength. Real courage was allowing someone the freedom to try, to stumble, and to rise again. As the final notes of the melody faded into silence, Lyra looked up at Ethan with shining silver eyes. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around him in a heartfelt embrace. "I finally felt normal," she whispered. The words pierced every heart in the ballroom. Empress Seraphis quietly wiped away a tear before anyone could notice. In that unforgettable moment, she realized the greatest gift the human had given her daughter was not a dance. It was the belief that she belonged, the lesson that shook an empire. The applause inside the Grand Unity Ballroom continued long after the music had ended. Guests from hundreds of worlds rose to their feet, not because they had witnessed an extraordinary performance, but because they had witnessed something far rarer. Genuine kindness without expectation of reward. Princess Lyra stood beside Ethan, still holding his hand. Her cheeks glowed with happiness. And for the first time in years, she faced the crowd without lowering her eyes. She no longer looked like a lonely child hiding behind her mother's throne. She looked like a princess who had discovered her own courage. Empress Seraphis slowly rose from her throne. The ballroom fell silent once again. Every noble, ambassador, and military commander waited to hear the judgment of the most powerful ruler in the galaxy. Instead of anger, the Empress descended the marble steps and stopped before Ethan. The human waiter bowed respectfully, expecting to be dismissed from palace service for breaking royal protocol. "You understand what you've done?" the Empress asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "I broke protocol, Your Majesty." A faint smile crossed her face. "No." Her voice echoed through the magnificent hall. "You broke something far older." She turned toward the gathered guests. "You broke our fear." The words stunned the audience. For generations, the Empire had treated Princess Lyra with endless protection. Every staircase had been replaced with ramps. Every event had been carefully arranged to prevent accidents. Every decision had been made with love. Yet somewhere along the way, protection had become isolation. No one had intended to exclude her, but everyone had. The Empress looked at her daughter, who was laughing softly with Ethan as though the enormous crowd around them no longer existed. "I searched the galaxy for doctors," she admitted. "I invited scientists from worlds beyond our borders. I funded laboratories, built research stations, and offered fortunes to anyone who could heal my child." She paused. "And tonight," her voice softened, "a human waiter accomplished something none of them could." The room remained completely silent. You reminded her she was never broken. Many guests lowered their heads in quiet reflection. Among them stood Lord Varek, one of the Empire's oldest nobles. For years he had argued that Princess Lyra should remain hidden from public ceremonies to preserve the image of a strong royal family. Now, watching the joyful smile on the young princess's face, shame settled heavily upon him. Nearby, diplomats from distant systems exchanged thoughtful glances. One whispered, "Our own children deserve this." Another nodded, "We've made the same mistake." Before long, discreet recordings of the dance began spreading across the Galactic network. Within hours, billions of citizens across countless worlds watched the simple moment between a human waiter and an alien princess. There were no explosions, no battles, no political speeches, only patience, only kindness. The response was overwhelming. Parents shared the recording with their children. Teachers replayed it in classrooms. Medical centers discussed it with therapists and caregivers. Across the galaxy, people began asking the same question. When did we start seeing disabilities before we saw people? The conversation reached every corner of civilized space. Not everyone welcomed it. Several influential nobles demanded Ethan's immediate punishment. He ignored royal protocol. He touched the imperial princess. He embarrassed the court. Others disagreed just as passionately. He showed respect. He gave her confidence. He honored the empire more than any ceremony. The debate continued through the night. Ethan himself remained unaware of the growing political storm. He had quietly returned to the servants' quarters, changed back into his simple uniform, and resumed helping clean the ballroom as though nothing unusual had happened. When another waiter asked if he regretted approaching the princess, Ethan smiled. "My sister taught me something a long time ago." "What?" "People don't always need someone to fix them." He carefully stacked crystal glasses. "Sometimes they just need someone willing to stand beside them." Those words eventually reached the Empress through palace attendants. She spent the remainder of the night alone inside the royal gardens, walking beneath glowing trees whose silver leaves shimmered beneath 3 moons. She replayed the evening in her mind. Every expensive treatment, every difficult decision, every attempt to protect Lyra. Then she remembered her daughter's laughter. It had not come from medicine. It had come from belonging. As dawn approached, Princess Lyra found her mother sitting quietly beside a reflecting pool. Without saying a word, the young princess wrapped her arms around the Empress. "I wasn't scared tonight," Lyra whispered. The Empress closed her eyes. "I know. I think." Lyra hesitated. "I want to dance again." Tears filled the Empress's eyes once more. "You will." She gently held her daughter's hands. "And next time," a determined smile appeared on her face. "You won't be the only child on the dance floor." At sunrise, imperial messengers were summoned from every corner of the palace. The Empress had reached a decision. What began as one quiet dance between a lonely princess and an ordinary human would no longer remain a single beautiful memory. It would become the beginning of a new future for the entire empire. One dance that changed the galaxy. The morning after the Grand Unity Ball, the Imperial Palace was unlike it had ever been before. News channels across the galaxy replayed the recording of Princess Lyra's dance with the human waiter. From the wealthiest core worlds to the smallest frontier colonies, billions of beings watched the same quiet moment. A frightened child taking her first confident steps while a stranger refused to let fear define her. The recording spread faster than any political announcement or military victory in recent history. Parents watched it with their children. Teachers shared it in classrooms. Doctors discussed it in hospitals. The galaxy was not talking about the strength of the Astrian Empire's fleets. It was talking about the strength of a single act of compassion. Inside the Imperial Council chamber, Empress Seraphis stood before governors, admirals, judges, and representatives from every sector of the empire. The vast room, usually reserved for matters of war and diplomacy, was silent as she prepared to speak. "For many years," the Empress began, "I believe my greatest responsibility was protecting my daughter from pain." She paused, looking around the chamber. "I was wrong." The council members exchanged uncertain glances. "I protected her so completely that I also protected her from living." Her words settled over the room like a gentle storm. The greatest prison is not made of walls. It is created when society decides what someone cannot become. No one interrupted. The human named Ethan Carter reminded us that dignity begins when we stop seeing limitations before we see the individual. She raised an official document bearing the imperial seal. Today, I signed the Imperial Inclusion Charter. The decree transformed life throughout the empire. Every public building would become accessible to citizens with physical disabilities. Schools would welcome students of every ability into the same classrooms. Government positions would be awarded according to talent rather than physical perfection. Medical care would continue to seek cures, but society would no longer treat disability as exclusion. Every governor present rose in support. The charter passed unanimously. When the ceremony ended, Ethan Carter was escorted to the throne room. Wearing his simple waiter uniform, he looked uncomfortable standing among decorated officers and royal advisors. He assumed he had been called to receive thanks before quietly returning to his ordinary life. Instead, the Empress stepped down from her throne and addressed him before the entire court. Ethan Carter. He bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, you came to this palace as a waiter. Yes, Your Majesty. You leave it today as something far greater. She presented him with a silver medallion bearing both the imperial crest and the emblem of humanity. From this day forward, you are the royal ambassador of humanity. A wave of surprised whispers filled the hall. The Empress smiled. We have generals who know how to win battles. We have scientists who know how to cure disease. But today, our empire also needs someone who reminds us how to see one another with kindness. Ethan accepted the medallion with trembling hands. I only asked a little girl to dance. The Empress shook her head gently. No, you reminded an empire what compassion looks like. Months passed. The changes spread farther than anyone expected. Across hundreds of worlds, communities organized inclusive dance festivals where children of every species and every ability danced together. Teachers redesigned school activities so no child was left watching from the sidelines. Engineers created new technologies that made public spaces easier to navigate, while artists, athletes, and musicians with disabilities were finally given opportunities to shine. Princess Lyra attended every festival she could. Her condition had not disappeared. She still lost her balance at times. She still needed extra effort to walk, but she no longer apologized for either. Whenever she stumbled, she smiled, regained her footing, and kept dancing. Soon other children followed her example. Instead of laughing at mistakes, they celebrated every attempt. The empire itself seemed lighter. Even neighboring civilizations noticed the remarkable transformation. They had once admired the Astrian Empire for its military strength and technological achievements. Now they admired something far rarer: its humanity. Ironically, it had taken an actual human to teach that lesson. 1 year later, the Grand Unity Ball returned. This time, before the orchestra played its opening melody, Princess Lyra stepped confidently onto the ballroom floor. Children from dozens of different species joined her. Some walked with canes, some used floating mobility devices, some communicated through glowing translators instead of spoken words. Yet together, they formed one joyful circle. As the music began, no one watched to see who danced perfectly. They watched to see everyone included. Standing beside the throne, Empress Seraphis smiled through grateful tears. She looked toward Ethan, now dressed in the uniform of a royal ambassador. You never healed my daughter's body, she said softly. You healed something far greater. Ethan smiled as the children laughed across the ballroom. The strongest civilizations, he replied, aren't measured by how they treat their greatest heroes. They're measured by how they welcome those who need a hand and then give them the courage to dance on their own. The Empress nodded, knowing those words would guide her empire for generations. And throughout the galaxy, humanity earned a reputation no fleet could ever conquer. A species whose greatest strength was not its power, but its compassion.